If you don't want major spoilers, I would come back to this video at a later date after you've completed the game. Silent Hill 2 is a game that thrives on psychological complexity and ambiguous storytelling. The multiple endings offer different perspectives on how James confronts or avoids his guilt, whether it's through acceptance, denial, obsession, or self-destruction. Each one reveals a different facet of James's psyche, encouraging the players to engage with the narrative and draw their own conclusions. James either finds redemption, falls deeper into denial, or succumbs to despair, and the game offers no simple answers on purpose. The interpretation is left to the player, which is part of what makes Silent Hill 2 such a compelling psychological experience. This is a game that invites you to think critically about James's journey, pushing you to explore the layers of his psyche. This means we can choose our own ending. I got the Leaf ending, and that's the ending canon that I choose for myself, but I've heard people state that In Water was considered canon, and that the voice actor for the original Silent Hill 2 preferred the In Water ending. That's the ending that he chose for himself. Let me know what you guys think, and if you have any official sources to challenge anything that we say here, please provide official links and references. And if you like psychological breakdowns and deep dives into characters from video games, consider liking and subscribing. In today's video, we're unpacking and diving deep into the multiple endings of Silent Hill 2 and their psychological implications, specifically exploring how they reflect James Sunderland's journey through guilt, trauma, and repression. I will substantiate my claims with some psychological theories. Remember, these are just my thoughts and opinions. However, as always, I respectfully open up the discussion to everybody in the comment section below. In fact, I strongly encourage you to add your own thoughts and opinions to the academic conversation within Silent Hill 2. Just remember, please be respectful. At the very end, I'd also like to run some theories about Laura with you. Is she real or a figment of James's imagination? How did she get to Silent Hill? I also wanted to have a discussion about Mary's actual location the entire time James is going through Silent Hill 2 and how that detail ties into the narrative, offering deeper layers of interpretation for some of the endings within Silent Hill 2. Learning this, especially as somebody who just beat the game and didn't play the original, and not knowing about the fan theories or Masahiro Ito, the chief art director's tweets about the theory, it blew my mind. Okay, so now that you know the outline of this video, make sure you have your coffee, and let's do this. James comes to Silent Hill in order to find his wife, Mary, because of the letter invitation he got from her, only for players to find out by the end that he murdered her. The endings represent different outcomes based on how James confronts or fails to confront his trauma and guilt. Each one offers a unique psychological insight into James's character and his emotional journey through the town of Silent Hill. In the Leave ending, James finally comes to terms with the truth about Mary's death, that he was the one who killed her. And after defeating Maria and reading Mary's letter, where she forgives him, James chooses to leave Silent Hill with Laura, a young girl who had a meaningful relationship with Mary. Mary even considered her like her own daughter, and Laura represents innocence and a potential fresh start for James, a new start that James allows himself. James moves through Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, finally reaching acceptance. The stages, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, each represent ways people emotionally process loss and trauma. So let's look at each of these stages as it pertains to James. Throughout his journey, James experiences denial in his belief that Mary may still be alive, anger and guilt at himself for resenting her illness, bargaining through his connection with Maria as a way to keep Mary, quote-unquote, alive, and depression through his self-loathing. And by the end, James has come full circle, acknowledging and accepting his responsibility for Mary's death. Reaching the stage of acceptance is crucial because it allows him to process his grief without being completely consumed by it. And I want to highlight this point about being consumed by grief for a moment. When you realize James is just a man and understand just how human and relatable he is, how real the situation can be, we can come to realize how grief actually affects us in a multitude of ways. Now, I just want to state it, we're not excusing the abhorrent thing that James did. It's not okay that James killed his wife. There's no excuse for that. I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm just trying to provide understanding and comprehension. And more importantly, this shows us how we all cope with grief. Many will become swallowed by desolation and despair. Few will persevere through their own hells, and even if they don't feel happiness or victory immediately, they're going to be stronger for it. You can choose your own canon ending, and it can be one like James's leave. This ending suggests that, although painful, moving through these stages and facing difficult truths can ultimately allow for healing and a chance to build a new life. In the in-water ending, James admitting to being unable to go on without Mary and that he can't forgive himself drives his car into Toluca Lake, drowning himself. After receiving Mary's letter, he's overwhelmed by guilt and believes the only way to be with her again is through death. This ending suggests that James is choosing not to allow himself forgiveness and is instead choosing to escape the crushing weight of his actions through self-destruction. Freud's Thanatos theory, or death drive, also known as death instinct, I personally prefer death instinct, is central to the in-water ending. Some of you might be familiar with who Thanatos was, or at the very least, you've heard that name before. But for those who don't know, in Greek mythology, Thanatos is the personification of death, and Thanatos represents one's unconscious pull towards aggression, self-destruction, and a desire for a return to a peaceful state of non-existence. This is a striking contrast to the violent deaths as seen with other Greek gods or figures like Ares, the god of war. Thanatos exemplifies a calm and natural end, like falling asleep. Also, that's why he's often depicted with Hypnos, the god of sleep. Freud would later adopt and implement the name to explain the theory that it was only human for one to try to escape pain or return to an inanimate state. Thanatos was the balance against Eros, the god of love and desire, but more specifically in psychology, Eros represented the human desire towards life, survival, pleasure, and creativity. I guess that's where the Marvel Comics got the name Thanos from, and where the MCU got the concept of perfect natural balance against life, from Thanatos. I'm not sure. For James, who is consumed by guilt, the death instinct surfaces as he seeks to escape the emotional turmoil that's been building since Mary's death. His entire journey through Silent Hill is him driving himself towards the end. Unable to forgive himself, he sees self-expiration as the only way to end his suffering, choosing to drown himself in Toluca Lake. However, Thanatos in this context is not just the desire for death, but a way for James to symbolically reunite with Mary as he feels unworthy of redemption. Unworthy is a concept we can draw similarities from with Angela, as she served as a cautionary tale for James in Silent Hill. His choice to surrender into death's embrace rather than face his grief and guilt shows how, for some, the weight of trauma can make self-destruction feel like the only path to relief. This dark impulse reveals the profound impact unresolved guilt and despair can have on the human psyche. This ending also aligns with the hopelessness theory of depression, where individuals can see their future as bleak and they feel incapable of changing their situation. This psychological theory suggests that depression is often triggered by a person's own self-belief that they are powerless to change their situation and that the future outcomes will only get worse. This theory, developed by psychologists Lynn Abramson, Gerald Mitalski, and Lauren Alloy, proposes that when people experience negative life events, they may interpret these events as stable, global, and internal. I want to take a moment to explain further because it's not the simplest thing to grasp, but while I do, as I'm explaining this, I want you to keep Angela from Silent Hill 2 in mind, and also think about if you're able to see any of these attributes within yourself. So, in the hopelessness theory of depression, stable, global, and internal are types of interpretations or attributions people might make when faced with trauma. each of these attributions influences how somebody views their situation and can deepen the feelings of hopelessness. Stable. This is when one person views a problem as permanent rather than temporary. For example, if somebody loses their job, a stable attribution would be thinking, I will never be able to keep a job, rather than seeing it as a one-time event. Seeing the problem as stable leads to the belief that things aren't going to get better. It's the self-belief that things won't improve. Global. This is when somebody interprets something bad that happened as affecting many aspects of their life rather than just one area. So instead of thinking, I lost my job, but I can still do well in other areas, a global attribution would be, I'm a failure at everything. This belief can make the person feel overwhelmed, as if all areas of life are affected. Internal. This is when somebody blames themselves for the event rather than seeing it as influenced by outside factors. For example, they might think, I lost my job because I'm not good enough, rather than considering external factors like the economy. Blaming oneself in this way can lower self-esteem and reinforce feelings of worthlessness. Remember, it's a terribly evil thing, but hopelessness is learned. Hopelessness can and is often taught, just like how Angela's family taught her. Together, these three interpretations can contribute to a sense of despair because they lead somebody to believe that their problems are unchangeable, widespread, and that it's their own fault, deepening depressive feelings. But that's not true. Things can change. Negativity doesn't permeate into every and all aspect of one's life, and it is not always all or only your fault. Outgrow the demoralized mindset if this is you. For James, the emotional burden of Mary's death, again caused by him, is too great, and his despair leads him to ending it all. Rather than seeking redemption or a path forward, he succumbs to his grief, making this one of the game's most tragic conclusions. And honestly, I didn't really like that ending. I felt that it was bland or too simple or it was missing something. However, in the ending in Stillness, which starts out as the same as in Water, we see Mary reach over and touch James, even talking with him. James begins to break down and he starts crying. I start crying. Admit it, you started crying. Then Mary whispers in his ears, and James asks if she's willing to wait for him. This ending is different and more so emotionally driven, I think. In the In Water ending, James reads the letter, but in the Stillness ending, he only looks at it. Okay, but on a concise psychological level, how do these two endings differ? The way that I see it is in Stillness, James gets forgiveness not only from the quote-unquote spirit of Mary, if that's what you want to call her, but from himself. In Water, he reads the letter, but because the forgiveness isn't coming from himself and only from Mary's letter, it is different. Mary forgives him, but he himself is still in this loop of not forgiving himself, falling to grief ever still. Now, I could be wrong, but let's also take a look at the actual names of these two endings. In Water, consider that when one is in water, things are still moving, they're still in motion. James is still going through the cycle of his despair. Stillness, on the other hand, consider that when one is still, unmoving, they're at peace and they have a calmness about them, signifying that in the Stillness ending, James, most importantly, forgives himself. He's now at peace and calm with himself. So, I don't know if you guys knew this, but the Stillness ending has a different audio than in Water. They both sound different. You can go ahead and take another listen to each of them. And because of this, people have speculated that James might still be alive in the Stillness ending. They're just saying that he jumped out of the car before it went into the water. But let me know what you guys think. In the Rebirth ending, James becomes obsessed with bringing Mary back to life, refusing to accept her death, learning about the old gods of Silent Hill, gathering occult artifacts, and taking Mary's corpse to perform a ritual by the lake. Also, look in the boat. You can see a blanket, and we'll talk about that soon. It's kind of creepy if you think about it. James just goes insane, and he tries to pull a pet cemetery. Even Maria, at the end, is fighting to defend herself to not be a part of James's ritual, as opposed to the other endings where Maria is fighting to be with him. James, rather than processing his guilt and grief, turns to magical thinking. This is an irrational belief that he can change reality by supernatural means. So for this ending, let's take a look at Carl Jung's concept of rebirth, which symbolizes transformation. But for Jung, rebirth is a symbolic process of psychological renewal, one that requires facing painful truths, not escaping them, or trying to sidestep or cheat or get around them. Carl Jung would potentially disapprove of James's fixation, his obsession on literally bringing Mary back, seeking a fantasy solution rather than achieving personal growth. Jung would interpret this ending as James avoiding his shadow, the repressed part of himself that holds the guilt, shame, and unresolved grief. By pursuing the ritual, James tries to sidestep his shadow, revealing his refusal to confront his darkest emotions. Rather than integrating his guilt and pain, James channels his energy into a fantasy solution where he can undo the past, avoiding true healing. In the end, Jung might interpret James's journey in the rebirth ending as a failure of individuation, which is the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious self. James remains psychologically fragmented and unable to achieve wholeness, leading him into the obsessive spiral, showing the destructive effects of unresolved guilt and denial. This ending shows his refusal to let go of the past and move on, making this one of the more desperate and obsessive endings. And if you want to hear more about Carl Jung's theories of shadow and self and repression, you can go ahead and check out my psychoanalysis on James Sunderland video. In the Maria ending, James kills Mary in the boss fight instead of Maria, symbolically killing Mary once more, and then he leaves Silent Hill with Maria. Again, Maria is the doppelganger of Mary, who embodies the idealized version of her, or as somebody in the comments of my last video points out, the exaggerated version of Mary. I also like that interpretation. In this ending, James chooses Maria over Mary. However, as they walk away, Maria begins to cough, suggesting that she might be suffering now from the same illness that claimed Mary's life. And James doesn't even really seem to care that she has that cough. His demeanor in that moment is a bit off-putting. It's weird. This hints that James is trapped in a cycle of denial, choosing a fantasy over confronting the truth about his past, and it seems like he knows it. You can't escape the truth. Lies don't last forever. The Maria ending represents denial and avoidance. By choosing to leave with Maria, James is opting for a fantasy version of Maria, one that aligns with his desires for a healthier, more sexually available partner. According to Freud's concept of cognitive dissonance, James is caught between his guilt over Mary's death and his desire to live in a world where that guilt doesn't exist. Maria, who is a reflection of James's id, his basic desires and wishes, allow him to live in a delusional fantasy, avoiding the emotional pain of dealing with the truth. Maria, who is a reflection of James's unconscious, his basic desires and wishes, allows him to live in a delusional fantasy, avoiding the emotional pain of dealing with the truth. Maria's cough at the end suggests that James is doomed to repeat his emotional suffering. Psychologically, this aligns with Freud's theory of repetition compulsion, where individuals unconsciously repeat patterns of trauma. However, it's usually in an attempt to master or resolve them. James is not free from his guilt by choosing to live with Maria. He's setting himself up to relive the emotional pain that came with Mary's illness and death, and that is setting himself up for failure. In the dog ending, it's revealed that a Shiba Inu has been controlling all of the events in Silent Hill. In the UFO ending, James gets abducted by aliens and replaced with a clone. Or maybe he was the clone. Anyway, these joke endings provide a humorous twist to the otherwise dark and serious narrative of the game. The absurdity of the UFO and dog endings align with the French philosopher, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but I believe it's pronounced Albert Camus. However, in college we just said Albert Camus. Albert Camus's philosophy of absurdism, which explores the conflict between humanity's search for meaning and the inherent meaningless of the universe. Camus argued that life often appears irrational and devoid of purpose, and humans must grapple with this lack of meaning. By revealing that a dog or aliens have been orchestrating all of Silent Hill's horrors, the game turns James's suffering into something utterly absurd, suggesting that his traumatic journey might have no deeper significance. This undermines the game's psychological weight, forcing players to confront the possibility that sometimes suffering has no intrinsic meaning, or that meaning is subjective. And in doing so, these endings invite players to laugh at the idea of searching for a reason in such a chaotic world, embracing Camus's concept that life's absurdity is best faced with humor and acceptance. The dog and UFO endings also serve as a form of escapism, allowing both James and the player to momentarily break away from the game's intense psychological themes. By turning the traumatic events into a joke, these endings allow players to deflect from the emotional heaviness of James's journey, sidestepping the intense guilt, loss, and trauma that permeate the main narrative. The absurd humor provides a temporary escape, offering relief from a grim story and allowing players to laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation. For players who are emotionally invested in the tragedy of James's story, these endings offer a light-hearted alternative that enables them to disengage from the narrative's darker implications, underscoring the psychological need to sometimes step back and just laugh at life's unexplainable absurdities. And this kind of reminds me of the TV show Rick and Morty, which underscores the philosophy that nothing matters, the universe is too big to care, that everything is pointless and meaningless, so why not just be happy and have a laugh? It's kind of liberating if you think about it. There was a movie called Bliss a while back with Salma Hayek and Owen Wilson, where they take a white drug, switch realities, often making it so difficult to know which reality is real. I guess the idea is that with this white drug, reality can be whatever you want it to be. In Silent Hill 2, in the Bliss ending, James drinks the liquid white Claudia, watches the VHS tape, and then, instead of Mary coughing in the video continues, with Mary talking further and the couple hugging. And this is nice. James loves his wife, I love my wife, and James even looks at the camera, and when Mary asks him if something is wrong, he says everything is fine. When the tape ends, we see James is no longer there. I find it hard to extrapolate what this means, but I think it means that James sort of just gives in to Silent Hill in a different way. Maybe with the drink and his desires, he gets trapped, or he puts himself in that tape, in that reality, and lives on with Mary in the tape. However, with scientific lens, remembering that the white Claudia is a hallucinogenic, we just can't trust anything we see after he takes that drink. James uses psychedelics here to dissociate. It's another form of escape. He chooses to live in a different reality, one where he doesn't need to think about or deal with the weight of truth. He tells himself everything is fine, and the drugs help him cope. Again, we don't see him after the tape, but a number of things could have happened. He could have just died somewhere off screen, maybe he got up and left, or maybe he's just tripping somewhere. I believe that James just chose blissful ignorance in the form of a drug. And I wanted to have a discussion about Laura for a bit. Some people believe that Laura is dead because she got to know Mary in palliative care, probably at St. Jerome's Hospital back in their hometown of Ashfield. For those who don't know, palliative care is a form of focused medical care for providing relief from symptoms and stressors of a serious illness. The aim is to improve quality of life for the patient and their families, or their caretakers. But it's not to be confused with a hospice, which is a place designated for individuals waiting out their definitive end of days. So just because Laura, or anyone, was in palliative care, while likely, doesn't necessarily mean that Laura is now a ghost. And Masahiro Ito himself stated that she was real. Also, because she is a child and innocent, Silent Hill doesn't manifest monsters for her the same way that it does for James and Angela. It's all sunshine and rainbows for her. Do you think that she sees James as a monster, or that Silent Hill conveys James to her as a twisted monster? I personally don't think so. The first thing she does is playfully stomp on his hand through a gate. Then we see her again relaxed on a wall as she talks to James, even making a reference to Mary, so she must know who James is. On top of that, she tricked James into going into that room, locking him in there with the flesh-lipped monster. I highly doubt that she would be malicious and try to hurt James. It's likely that she didn't know that he would be attacked by monsters because she doesn't see them. Now the other question is, how did she get to Silent Hill? I've seen people speculate she hitched a ride from Eddie because in the opening scene of Silent Hill 2 HD Remastered, we can see her giving him a nice little kick to Eddie while he's sitting on the floor next to a van. This happens presumably when Eddie is running away from the cops. This also explains why Laura had no problem just watching a movie and eating with him. Now, some people, self-included, have wondered where her parents are, and I looked it up, and it turns out Laura is an orphan, and how her parents died isn't stated. So yes, I think she is alive. I'm pretty sure she's alive. Plus, she just turned 8 last week.
I turned 8 last week.
Now let's talk about one of the most fascinating and chilling theories surrounding Silent Hill 2. Mary's body was in the backseat of James's car the entire time. This theory adds a whole new layer of depth to the game and provides a possible explanation for James's repression and his emotional journey throughout Silent Hill. Masahiro Ito, the chief art director of Silent Hill 2, confirmed in some tweets that Mary's body was intended to be placed in the back seat, not in the trunk, but that Mary is in the car. According to Ito, James put her in the back seat because he still loved her and couldn't treat her like an object to be discarded. This is a subtle but powerful detail, and it has many fans even theorizing that James has been physically carrying Mary's body with him throughout the entire game, though he is unable to consciously process it due to his repressed memories, which is also kind of weird, because to be carrying a body throughout the entire game but just not know that she's on your back, it's kind of insane. Nonetheless, this adds extra gravity to the narrative as a whole. Plus, I guess James finally did take Mary back to their special place, just like the letter talked about, assuming this is the case. Or another interesting thought could be that if he was really carrying Mary, again, who is a symbol of his guilt but also really heavy, it's easy to draw a comparison between James and Pyramid Head carrying that giant knife, Pyramid Head being James and the giant knife being Mary. Ito's confirmation gives weight to the idea that Mary's body symbolizes James's guilt. It's always there, following him throughout his journey, even though he can't face it directly. This theory would also help to clear up and resolve some of the timeline issues or confusion related to Laura. In the game, Laura carries a letter from Mary that says Happy 8th birthday, Laura, and mentions that she turned 8 last week. If Mary had been dead for several months, this timeline wouldn't make any sense. However, if James killed Mary just before the events of the game, it explains why Laura's birthday is still fresh in her memory and why she believes that Mary is still alive. If Mary's death happened recently, it also makes sense that James's guilt would be so raw and overwhelming, contributing to the repressed memories that send him spiraling into Silent Hill. Another reason that many, including myself, believe that James just killed Mary is the opening bathroom scene. His hands are uncontrollably shaking. He's staring at himself in the mirror. It's like he's still coming down from an adrenaline rush, which is something that somebody might feel if they had just killed somebody. Ito, in a tweet, talking about Mary being in the car, even asks, "Why did we put the public restroom cutscene at the opening?" To show that James just killed Mary in Ashfield, which is a day's drive away, and brought her to Silent Hill. But hey, that's just the theory. One of the most intriguing moments supporting Mary being in the back seat occurs in the In Water ending. Just before James drives his car into Toluca Lake, there's a scene where he glances at the backseat of his car, and the camera angle even shows James looking at the backseat of the car. Now, the game doesn't exactly show us what he's looking at, but if we follow the theory that Mary's body had been there the whole time, this moment takes on incredible significance. James's glance could be the first time he's consciously acknowledging that Mary's corpse has been with him throughout the entire journey. after repressing. You know what I just thought about? If in the Leave ending, James takes Laura back to the car, that would be kind of weird for Laura to see that Mary is dead in the back seat. Anyway, after repressing this truth for so long, this look at the back seat could be his final acknowledgement of the weight that he's been carrying, both literally and emotionally. This would mean that his decision to drive into the lake isn't just about ending his life, it's about joining Mary in death, as he takes her body with him to the bottom of the lake. This scene speaks to the power of repression and the return of the repressed, the concept in Freud's psychoanalysis where repressed memories and emotions resurface, often in unexpected or symbolic ways. By glancing at the back seat, James is finally forced to confront the truth he's been avoiding. His decision to end his life can be seen as the ultimate consequence of his inability to process his guilt. Whether you believe this theory or not, it provides an intriguing way to view the events of Silent Hill 2 and the emotional weight of James's journey. In the end, Silent Hill 2 reminds us that the greatest horrors often come from within, but that we can all find our own meaning and choose our own endings.
Will you wait for me?
James, I've always been waiting for you.